Hello, good morning, everybody. We will just wait a few minutes for more people to join us in the call. But welcome to our week 2 of Legal Matters. Um, we'll get started in just a few minutes. For all of you just joining us, we will be starting in just a couple of minutes. We are waiting for more people to join our call. So just stand by for a little bit. All right, I think we are 5 minutes past. So, Lori, if you want, we can go ahead and get started. I'll just do a super quick introduction. Uh, my name is Ana Maria Contreras. I am the programs coordinator for the Jacksonville Women's Business Center. Um, Jackie, if you were here last week, Jackie started everything. She is our director. She is out of the office today, but I am more than happy to kind of take over this morning. We're super excited that you're joining us here for week 2. And I just want to make sure you guys all have access to our online classroom, that you guys have all taken advantage of that resource that we've added this year to our programs. You should have received an email with that information last week from Jackie. But I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm super excited to introduce Laura Lee. So, Laura Lee, if you want, you can go ahead and begin. I will mute myself and take myself out of the video. If anybody has any questions throughout Lori's presentation, please feel free to go in the chat and ask those questions.
Very good. Thank you, Ana Maria. So just to follow up with that, the question and answer button, if you hover, you can type in your questions there. I know sometimes when I'm going over some materials, people tend to have questions. And if you were with us last week and you have some questions that kind of follow up to maybe what you saw, the audit sheets in the online classroom, and you have questions for that, please go ahead and type those in the question and answer as well, and then I can get to those. So good morning, everyone. This is week 2 of Legal Matters, and this is a program that we put together for the benefit of you, clients of the Jacksonville Women's Business Center. And just to give you a brief introduction for me, if you weren't with us last week, is that my name is Laurie Lee. I am a business attorney. For the past 17 years, I've practiced business law, and I've helped hundreds of small businesses during the course of that time. I am the owner of the legal department for Service Professionals. Our firm is only focused on small businesses and only focused on service providers. So we're very specialized in what we do with the type of businesses that we help. I say that just because a lot of times, businesses that offer products for sale, so whether it's retail or manufacturing, you all still have the same types of legal issues. There's just a few differences that I'll go ahead and go over when we get to that point. So sometimes you'll see some things that refer to service professionals, and that's because of the firm and how we're structured at our firm, the legal department. But the presentation today is meant for all small businesses. And by small, I mean less than 20 employees. So it could be 1 employee all the way up to 20 employees. And that's what we consider to be small. So all of you as business owners have had the opportunity to start your businesses, or you're in the process of starting your businesses. And one of the things that I talked about last week that I want to make sure I reiterate this week is the 2 different types of business owners that we see. One is called the flyers and one is called the grounders. So the flyers are the people that I call the ones who jump off the cliff and try to learn to fly as they're going. So they might not start out knowing everything. They just said, I'm just going to get started and I'll figure it out as I go. Those are the people in this kind of wretched plane here that just try to get some air and figure it out as they go, build their plane while they're trying to fly. The grounders are the other type of people that we see as business owners, and they're really the ones who are trying to start from the ground up. They get to the sky by growing the tree. And so the tree, they have to understand all the different rules and what they need to do because they want to do it right from the beginning. So those are the grounders. So depending on the type of business owner you are, you will approach things differently. And I say this because I don't want there to be any judgment for business owners in different stages of business. So you could be a brand new business owner, somebody who's just getting ready to start. Or you could be in business for 10, 20 years already, and you might still have the same issues. You might see something we talk about and you're like, oh my gosh, I should have done that. There's no judgment here. You were probably a flyer, which means you jump off the cliff and you try to figure it out, and you only were looking at the things that were immediate in front of you. Now is the time to go back in and put these things in place to make your business grow stronger, because that's what it's all about. So you need a stronger plane. In any stage you're in, if you want to grow, you want to gain altitude, you want more people in that plane, the plane becomes heavier, you got to build it stronger. So more customers and clients on that plane, the more employees on that plane, the heavier it becomes, the stronger it needs to be. So that's what we're talking about, is building a stronger plane, which means that you put infrastructure into your business to make it stronger. How do you do that? Well, first of all, let's go over this map. This map is what we developed in our firm to help our clients, and that's why it says legal infrastructure for your service business. So it is developed specifically for service businesses, but I'll show you there's one area on here where product companies also come into play. So last week, we talked about this green section right here. This is government regulations. So within government regulations, there's 2 subcategories. There's entity structure, which are corporations and LLCs and how all of that works. And we talked about that last week. And there's also regulatory compliance that we talked about last week. And those are all the rules and regulations that governments put out for businesses to follow. And we talked about how that could be at the federal level, at the state level, and then at the local level, the city or county level. So all of that green area are government regulations, and that was last week. This week, we're going to be talking about external relationships. We're going to be talking about client relationships and vendor relationships. And so these are people that are outside of your business, and that's why we call them external relationships. So these are the two topics for today. Next week, we're going to talk about internal relationships. Internal means that you've got maybe some business partners. Maybe you already have business partners or you're thinking about getting business partners, but this is about owner relationships. And then we've got workers. Workers are either employees or independent contractors, but both of those types of workers are inside. That's why we have internal relationships. And then over here on the right is what we create. So for service professionals, we create intellectual property. Everything we're creating is not tangible. It's not a product, but it's important and needs to be protected just the same. So I give the example of this map. This map is something I created. It is my intellectual property, and that's why it has my copyright down here in the left-hand corner, because I am the owner of this intellectual property. Product-based companies also have another subset over here, which is regulations and rules and things about products, warranties, FDA approvals, manufacturing issues, retail issues, distribution issues. That is also over here, which is a different subset of what you create. So we'll talk about that in our last week of this series. So looking at this infrastructure map, this tells you how to build your business stronger. This tells you how to build your infrastructure. So all of these different areas focus your attention on what needs to be done. So anytime we're talking to a client about a particular subject, a particular issue, we're always pointing out where it falls on this map. That just helps your brain organize all this information, because sometimes with legal information, we tend to think that it's complicated, it's sophisticated, we don't quite understand it, and we tend to kind of shut down a little bit. And so having this map helps people kind of just keep it organized, and then it seems a little bit simpler to deal with. All right, so speaking of simpler to deal with, last week we gave you an audit sheets. So for this whole legal matters class, what we're going to do is we're going to be building you an audit, a self-audit that you create over the course of this month together. So the first week, you got 2 audit sheets in your virtual classroom. And the one audit sheet is about entity structure. And we kind of went over the entity structure, whether it was a corporation or whether it was an LLC. Each of those 2 types of audit sheets are in there. So that's for you to fill out. And it goes through like, do you have this? Excuse me, who are the owners? Who are the directors? Who are the officers? You have stock certificates? Do you have all these different types of documents that are required? And then it goes through all this other information, hopefully that you filled out and you put together for yourself. And you'll have that form then to show you, okay, do I need to go back in and fill these gaps? Do I need to go back in and get some bylaws? Do I need an operating agreement? Are these things that I skipped over that I need to have to make my business strong? And to make sure that liability shield protects me while I'm doing business, because that's the whole point of having that entity structure. And then the other audit sheet we gave you was about government regulations, and it helped to point you in directions that you might be. So some things on there was like taking credit cards and having a website and those types of things most small businesses do. But there was some blanks in there for you to fill out yourself so that you could see maybe there were some other issues you needed to take a look at. And along with that, we gave you a resource list of websites that you could go to and take a look at some of those government regulations that might be applicable to you. And we talked about the 3 different types. The one type was industry. Your particular type of business would have specific rules. Then we talked about the the activity type of things that you do, like the taking credit cards, websites, activities that businesses do. And then we talked about where you actually are, your location-based rules. So within Jacksonville, there are specific Jacksonville rules that businesses in Orlando don't have to follow. So given the three categories, you will have different rules for your business. And so that was the point of last week's. And so you have your government regulations audit sheet. And I hope that you've taken the time to go through that and kind of flagged some areas where you want to spend some time over the next few months to go back in and put some of these things in place. Again, keep in mind that if you're taking baby steps, it's one bite at a time of the elephant, okay? It's not to feel overwhelmed to say, I need to go back and do all these things. You schedule your own time, whether that's, Friday mornings for a couple of hours to work on these issues, or Friday afternoons or Monday morning, whenever it is you schedule the time to work on your business, and then go ahead and put these things in place one piece at a time, and then you'll have the resources to do it. Okay, so that was last month, and I just talked about calendaring it. When are you going to address this concern? Go ahead and get it on your calendar so you don't just know about it and then it just sits there and you never do it, because then it's going to come back to your attention once it becomes a problem. And our whole purpose is to avoid problems. So we don't want small businesses to deal with problems because they don't necessarily have all the resources that they need to handle those problems. Whereas big businesses that have big budgets and can handle the problems that come their way. So you know what? They're not too concerned with making sure that happens, because if something bad happens, they can handle it. Small businesses don't have that leverage. They don't have that cushion available. So if a business comes their way, that could be too big of a wave and could drown them. So small businesses have a much, much higher rate of success if they are proactive and take care of these things so that the problems don't occur to begin with. So that's my spiel. I want you to make sure you put these things on your calendar and take the time to work on this. So that leads me to today. External relationships for today. We're going to talk for about 30 minutes about client relationships, and then we'll talk for the remainder 30 minutes about vendor relationships. And then I'm going to save some time at the very end to go over some of your questions. If I do see questions that pop in that are related to what I'm actually talking about, I'll try to keep my eye on that, and Anna Maria is going to help me keep my eye on that as well. But if I don't get to your question while I'm in the process of the presentation, we'll catch all of those at the end. All right, so let's get started on our first topic for today, which is client relationships. And it is to your benefit that you have honest and clear expectations with your clients. And when I say clients, I mean customers as well. Because even if you have a customer that comes in, if you're a retail and comes into your business location, it is important that they understand that you come from a place of honesty and clarity, and that what they're buying from you is what they expect to buy from you. For service professionals or for service providers, it's even more important because your relationship continues beyond the sale. So for product-based companies, once the sale happens, the relationship ends. The customer walks out of your business with the product that they just purchased and they're gone. For service providers, our relationships carry on. Our relationship actually starts at the sale. So once somebody hires us to provide a service, that's when the relationship starts to begin. So this moment of time, right when somebody purchases from you, is very important on both sides. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. If you are a business, and the majority of small businesses are this type of business, that have some sort of contract with your client or your customers, and you want to make sure that your contract with your clients and customers is a good start to your relationship. So I want to tell you two stories. These are my personal stories. And I have changed the identities to protect those involved. So the first story I want to tell you is several years ago, we decided to replace the roof on our house. And we interviewed roofing companies and talked to all the different ones. We picked the one that we really liked. We liked what they had to say. They answered all of our questions. They seemed like they really knew what they were doing. They were very attentive. They followed up on everything, just really impressive. So we said, you know what, we're going to hire this company to put a roof on our house. Well, then they show up with their contract. And setting aside the fact that I'm a contract attorney, okay, put that aside for a minute because my husband had the same reaction and he's not an attorney. So we read the contract. The contract was a page and a half. It said very little. I mean, if you think about the kind of expenditure for, replacing a large roof and, the amount of liability that goes into that, somebody falls off your house, I mean, there's so much going on here with this roof. It's a big purchase financially, but it's also a big risk. And you got to make sure somebody you hire knows what they're doing. So I'm reading this contract and it's very, very bare bones. It doesn't say anything about what we talked about. All the conversations we'd had with them, no mention in their contract whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it was so bare bones that we started to be like, well, I'm not too sure about this because some of the stuff that they had in the contract was the opposite of what they told us. And so, I think the tendency is to say, well, it's just a contract. We can just sign it. It's just a formality. What they told us is what counts. That's not the case. What they told you is what doesn't count. What does count is in the contract. And so being an attorney, I know this and I'm paying attention to the contract and I'm starting to get a little, maybe this wasn't the right choice for this company. Maybe I'm starting to get doubtful. So I start asking more questions. Nope, they answered my questions. We say, okay, we're going to move forward. We've gotten this far. We'll move forward. We've signed the contract. We hired them. Lo and behold, our relationship did not start out so good because we were already questioning them. Because the contract did not instill confidence in us, it actually undermined our confidence in them. So we started questioning. We're doubtful. We're skeptical. We're not great clients because we're not really assured that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so we're asking questions and we're wanting to find out. Well, long story short, rained, they didn't do what they needed to do, and our entire kitchen was flooded. And it turned out to be a disaster nightmare. And it turned out that the company wasn't as good as we thought they would have been. And we should have looked at that contract, and that contract told us that they weren't as good as they should have been. So the contract reflects the business, right? I mean, that's what people think. They think you get a crappy contract, this is going to be a crappy business. Contrast that with an accountant that we hired several years ago. And you think, yeah, you hire a accountant. Why do you need to have a contract? You know what the accountant does? They prepare your taxes. They keep your books for you. This contract was amazing. We read this contract. It said, this is what we're going to do for you. This is who you are. This is what your concerns are. I mean, we really felt like they knew us and understood us. And this was just their standard contract they gave everybody. Like, they went to the trouble of saying, we get you. We understand who you are and we're here to help you. And this is how we're going to help you. It wasn't just all about, this is what you pay us. And if you don't pay us, we have a late fee and we can come after you with attorney's fees. It wasn't just that. Yes, there was that because that's required, but there was all this extra stuff and it was organized and it was easy to read. And it was really a nice start to that relationship. And so when we started working with that accountant, we had already had this trust going because we knew they had this nice, solid, good contract. This must be a good business to work with because their contract was really impressive. It wasn't just full of legalese. It wasn't downloaded off the internet. It was clearly customized for this particular business. And they had put some thought into it. Therefore, we had more confidence in this. So then when they start making a few mistakes, as humans do, we give them the benefit of the doubt. Oh, that's okay. You know what? We get that. Everyone makes mistakes. You caught it. You go back, you fix it. We were very patient and understanding, and we were good clients to work with for them because we came with that attitude. We weren't the greatest clients for the roofing company. I will admit that because we were already not confident in their abilities because the contract that they presented us was not what they had told us. And so this whole contract at the beginning of the relationship is really important. So let's talk about what yours says about you. So what does your contract say about you when you hand it to your client? Whoever your client is. It could be B2B, business to business. It could be B2C, business to consumer. Whatever that is, what does that say about you? And this is what you need to understand when you hand this out. When it's a consumer, and I mean, if it's a business, then they are also a consumer, because every contract gives an impression. Whether you want it to or not, every contract gives an impression. What impression does yours give? I'd like for you to take the time and exchange your contract with someone. Give it to someone that you know will give you honest feedback, and ask them, what is your first impression? What do you think of this contract? Give me 3 words of this contract. Is it neat, organized, professional? Is it sloppy, too short, don't understand? Is it too long, complicated, doesn't say anything? How that mean, like legalese, all this like fancy language, but doesn't really say anything. What does it mean to somebody? And get somebody's outside opinion of what your contract looks like. And then ask them to rate the professionalism on a 1 to 5 scale. Ask them to rate your trustworthiness. What kind of trustworthiness do you convey in your contract? And have them rate you 1 to 5. And then ask them, do you clearly understand what you'll get from me? If you were to hire me, do you clearly understand what I'm going to provide? Because hiding the ball from your clients is never a good thing. It never works out. Whenever we get called in for conflicts with businesses, with our clients who are having trouble with their clients, it's always because of expectations. Their clients aren't ending up with good expectations because the contract doesn't say this is what you're going to get. And as a business, as a service provider, you're like, well, I'm not sure I really want to promise that, because I don't want people to kind of, over expect things, and I kind of want to leave it a little bit vague. I think that protects me if I need to kind of back out a little bit. No, it doesn't. It just creates more problems for you, because the client is going to expect things that you never intended to provide. So that is one of the main things about using service contracts to your advantage. All right. So I would recommend that you do this because it gives you such good feedback from a different perspective. And sometimes we can't understand what someone else's impression might be. So the next question is, does your contract protect your business? So I call this the front side and the back side. So the front side is, what is this relationship you're building with your client or your customer? That's the front side. What does this say about you? What's the relationship getting started out on? That's the side where you're making money, right? Like the client's paying you, you're making money, you're doing this. The back side is, does your contract protect your business? And I call that saving money. Is your contract saving you money? So you don't have to pay if some conflict comes up. So there's 2 sides to this. This is the back side. Does your contract protect your business? This is the business side. Every contract has multiple purposes. So let's talk about that. One is you establish the exchange. I'm giving you something. In return, you're giving me something. The exchange. One side is usually money. The other side can be a product or a service. What is it? So that exchange is what's important, and you need to define that. That's one of the key reasons. It establishes a good relationship to build on over time. And again, for service providers, that's really important, so that you continue that relationship with your clients. It provides safeguards. So if things go off the rails, what's there to help you minimize that problem? So keep in mind, our number 1 goal is to avoid problems. Our number 2 goal is that if problems occur, we need to minimize their impact. So keeping those safeguards in there. So it means like, okay, if we go off the rails, at least I've got these safeguards in here that'll help protect me from losing either a bunch of money, time, resources, attention, sanity, whatever that might be. So the 4th one is to make sure it's legally binding. So when you sign a contract, it's not like, yeah, I'm thinking about doing this. You're thinking about doing this. We'll see. If it works out, it works out. That's great. That's not a contract. A contract is make sure it's legally binding so that you both can rely upon it. In business, the best thing to promote business is reliability. The thing that undermines business is unreliability, because you're constantly wondering what's going to happen. There's too many variables that you can't rely on something and move forward. So reliability is important. So does your contract protect your business? And that's one of the reasons why you need to take a look at it, which we're going to do. All right. So does your contract create a good relationship? Trust and confidence is important. We've talked about that. Every contract sets the scene and it allows you to show you understand and care. Establish your trust by being fair and direct. Again, nobody wants to think that they're going to be scammed, or no one wants to think that they can, get shorted somehow. So you want to make sure that you establish trust by being fair and direct and letting somebody know this is how it's going to be. This is what we're going to give you. This is what you're going to give me. This is how our relationship's going to work. Puts clients at ease with explanations. I'm all about adding the softer side into contracts. Explain, this is how this works. This is how this, speak in a normal voice. People don't want to read legalese. They want to read what makes sense to them. And so if you explain, this is my coaching business. This is how I coach. This is my perspective. This is where I come from. When we have many, many clients who are coaching and online education services, a lot of times it's just putting the reason why you do what you do in your contract helps people understand where you're coming from. And then again, I just said this, using easy to understand language. There's no point in communicating if the other party has no idea what you're saying. I mean, it's like speaking in a foreign language, nobody understands, so then there's no connection. The connection is what's important here. So speak in a language that other people can understand, they get the message, their connection is made, the relationship builds from there.
Hey, Lori.
Yes.
Before you move on to our audits, we have a question from Damika Jackson. She asks, we currently use Law Depot for our contracts. We are able to customize some of the verbiage to specify details for that company. What are your thoughts on the use of Law Depot?
That's a hard question to answer because a lot of it will depend on your business. So, let me back up here. So when companies like Law Depot or some of these other online companies, they develop contracts and then they sell them for, really cheaply. What they do is they make that contract as wide as possible. So make it as general as possible. So it can apply to everybody, right? So if you've got this really general contract so that everybody can use it, what does it actually say? Not much, because how can they possibly create something that would apply to me and you and you and you and you? How can they possibly write a contract that all of us could use? So it's normally they're so simple so that everybody can use it. And they're very general, like not specific at all. And so when you use this, what is that saying to your client or your customer? So use that. I recommend that you find out what people think of that, from a relationship perspective. What are people's impression? When you give it to somebody, what's the impression of that? Get some feedback from somebody who will be honest with you and say, look, if I gave you this roofing contract, what would you think of it? And see what they say. I think that, the fact that you can customize some of the verbiage is good. Is there enough for you to customize that it feels to somebody like you're a professional company and you've taken the time to sit down and really think about, do you show that you're understanding and caring? Does it answer somebody's questions before they even have to ask? Does it really fit what you do? Like, does it say you're going to bill them on the first of the month, but you don't actually bill them on the first of the month? You bill them at the end of the month? I mean, those are the disconnects that people start to wonder about. Well, if you're not doing this, what you say you're going to do, what else are you not doing that you say you're going to do? So sometimes when you just grab a contract online and you start using it, but you don't actually do it that way, then that cuts against you. So, all those variables, does it fit what you actually do? Does it really say what it needs to say as far as, this is what you provide? Can you customize it enough? And then, what do third parties, rate it as? What's their impression? And see what they say. And I think that would give you your answer. All right, so this is the audit sheet that we are going to use to give yourself an audit. So I've just put snapshots in here so that I don't have to switch my screen back and forth, but the full sheet will be in your classroom after today. So I want to go over it with you so that when you get it, it's not going to be the first time you're reading through it. Okay. So the first section is experience with clients. So it says, does your interaction, let me back up a minute. This section is to help you figure out what should be in your client, in your client contract. Okay, these are questions that are going to prompt you to think. And you're going to say, maybe that is something I need to put into my contract. Okay, so these are things that when you answer, will tell you whether that becomes an action item. So for example, does your interaction with your client last more than one day? Is it a sale of a product or is it a service? If it's a sale of a product, you know what? Maybe you don't need a contract. Or maybe you do. Maybe it's a really expensive product and you need to make sure that you are disclaiming your warranties. Maybe you need to make sure that if you do give a warranty on it, you need to make sure that if somebody owes you money, if it's payments over time, all those things come into play here. So you need to say, is this more than a one-day relationship? And if it is, then that indicates that your contract is going to be important. Do your clients hire you more than once, over and over again? Then maybe it's worth putting some effort into your contract so that your client feels comfortable hiring you again. Do you and your client sign an agreement that outlines what you will do? If the answer is no, that is definitely an action item. You definitely need a written contract because that makes people feel more secure. So I love it when say, oh no, we operate on a handshake. You can imagine how many times I hear this, right? We're good on a handshake. We're old fashioned. We trust each other at our word. That might be good for you, but the other side, that's not going to make them feel good because that doesn't say to them, oh, they trust me. That feels good to say they trust me, but do I trust you? I'm not really sure I know you, and I give you all this money because the customer is paying, right? I give you all this money. Am I going to get what I am promised? So the handshake doesn't do any good on the client side. It might feel good on your side because it might feel like, you're the kind of person that has trust and integrity. But on the client side, that does not feel good at all. So you can ask any client in the world, they're going to answer that and they're going to say, I want to make sure I get what I pay for. And having a contract allows them to feel that security. Do you and your client sign an agreement about payment terms? Again, you want to make sure the payment terms are set out. If you use proposals, a lot of times people just use proposals and then they say, oh, that's my contract. Your proposal is not your contract. A proposal is not binding. And even if it does turn binding after you sign it, it doesn't have all the nitty-gritty details in there that the contract should have to protect your business. So you need to make sure that if the proposal is the kind that turns into a contract, you need to have all that extra stuff in the proposal because you can't go back in and put it in later. Once it's signed, it's signed. So that's an important thing. If you have a contract, has it been updated in the past 18 months? Do you have all your clients sign a contract with you? You should, picking and choosing is no good. If you had any issues with clients, what were they? Like, what are your past issues? So recently I wrote a contract for a client who's a real specialty service provider. And she says to me, my clients wouldn't meet with me. Like I needed to get information with them to do what I needed to do. And it was so hard to schedule meetings with them. And yet they would still expect me to meet my deadline. So I'm trying to meet my deadline, but I can't get the information from the clients because they won't meet with me. And yet they still expect me to meet my deadline. So what we did is we said, okay, we're going to put this thing in the contract. If you don't meet with us, if you don't give the information in the interview that you need to give, then our deadline gets extended. So those kinds of past issues will trigger your mind to say, maybe that's something I need to put into my contract. Do you have too many unhappy or unreasonable clients? Maybe this is a setting expectations issue. If people are complaining a lot, it may have nothing to do with your services or your products. Your products and services might be great. They might be top quality. You might be giving exactly what you should be giving. But the problem is on the front end because the client is disconnected from what you actually are giving. And so their expectation is up here, when you give something way over here. And then they're like, wait a minute, that's not what I wanted, or that's not what I expected. And so that can create unhappy and unreasonable clients. And setting that expectation up front from the very beginning is only to benefit you. Because again, they're happy clients. They give testimonials. They'll rehire you. They'll refer people to you. That you just by, even if they don't do any of that, just by avoiding problems with them is a benefit to you. So it's worth the time and effort. This next section on your audit sheet is all about client agreements. And so what are the things that you have in here that maybe you should think about? So one is, does your contract explain what you do? And does it also explain what you don't do or won't do? And so that's sometimes important. Does your contract set out deadlines and expectations for performance? Do you set out deadlines and expectations for payments? If you send invoices, are your terms of the invoice the same as your contract? Because this is where some people get messed up. Because if you send the invoice and it doesn't have the same terms as your contract, which one controls? And it becomes a problem. And then you can't enforce it because now you've got two conflicting terms. Oh, it's due on the 4th. Oh, no, it's due on the 10th. It's now the 10th. Which one was it? So whether you can charge late fees or whether you can stop work, and all these things become issues and problems that you shouldn't be dealing with. You should be focused on running and growing your business, not dealing with these problems and putting out these fires. So the contracts can certainly help you avoid that. Do you need any permissions from your client? I once had a client that provided some really neat aerial videography for farmland. And so what happened was it was agricultural inspections when he needed to go on to the actual farm to physically be there to do these aerial inspections. Well, we needed to get permission from the owner of that property. And so in the contract, it says, I have permission to enter this property. Are there other permissions that you would need from your client for this? Taking photographs is one. A lot of times entertainment companies and event companies, they want to take pictures of these events that they put on. Well, do you have permission from your client to do that? I mean, you might be able to take the pictures, but you wouldn't be able to use them without their permission. Any warranties for your work or warranties from your products? If something goes wrong, what would you do to fix it? Does your contract limit your liability? If you get sued, do you have a cap on what you would be responsible for? It's perfectly acceptable for many service providers to have a cap. It's also acceptable for some product sellers. If you've got some big machinery or something that you sell that could be dangerous, then you could have a limit of liability, or you could have a disclaimer of liability that says, I'm not responsible at all. If you're an idiot, you don't know how to operate this machinery and you get hurt, that's not my fault. You should have learned how to operate the machinery. So all these things go into your client or into your contract. And here's an interesting one that I always take a look at is your insurance policies. So if you have an insurance policy, what is your limit? So if you've got a limit of $1 million, should your contract limit your liability to $1 million? So your insurance policy and your contract go hand in hand to make sure that whatever liability you have insurance to cover it. And so that's an important piece. Again, we talked about showing professionalism. Does it make a good impression on your client? Does it include all the deal terms? Again, don't be the roofer who left out every single thing they told us that they would do, was never in their contract. Don't be that person. Does it seem fair? Does it encourage them to trust you? Does it have the right language to be legally binding? This is like my magic language thing where, you have to have certain things that say, that's why proposals aren't binding until they have the magic language. What happens if you need to terminate it early? People sometimes don't think about this, but what happens if something happens to you or your business and you can't finish? Or what happens if the client wants to fire you before you're finished? What do they have to pay you? What do you have to refund? And then we talked about easy to read, understand. Is it customized to your business? Are you happy and comfortable with the contract that you use right now? Is this something that you want to improve upon to show, the changes in your business since you've written it, or, what you want to start doing something different, or if this is always something you wanted to come back to? Make sure you check those boxes and flag your action items. So that's what you're going to get for the client relationships. And it's going to just be issue spotting right now. You're not fixing the problems right now. You're just spotting the issues. You're spotting where the problems are. So this is meant to go through and be like, okay, I'm good on this. I'm good on this. I'm good on this. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not good on that one. And I'm not good on that one. And then you're going to go back and you're going to calendar what your concerns are. Okay. So you're going to make sure you plug in when, so right now is not the time to fix it. Right now is the time to flag it. Okay, so let's keep our eye on the ball and not get overwhelmed by all these things that we just talked about. You're just flagging the issues. Okay, so we talked about calendar. When are you going to address it? So that was our client relationships. That was our first external relationship audit. Now we're going to go into looking at our vendors. This is another external relationship that businesses have. So vendor relationships, it's important that you understand what they are and that you're getting the deal you think you're going to get. Now we're going to flip ourselves. We're going to flip ourselves into being in the seat of the client, because now you're the client and you're hiring somebody. You're hiring a business to provide something to you. So let's talk about that one. Flip that in your mind for just a second. What are vendors? So vendors are other businesses that provide you services. So it could be an accountant. It could be your attorney. It could be your cleaning service. It could be your shredding service. It could be your bookkeeper, a Comcast, your internet provider. It could be your cell provider, supplies, inventory. I mean, you name it. All those people you pay, all you got to do is go down your budget and look at who you pay. That'll tell you who your vendors are. So what has your experience been like with those vendors? Have you had a good experience or have you not had a good experience? And so what we're going to look at is, who are your current vendors? We're going to look at, do you have a written contract with them? And what is your level of satisfaction? So these are the three things we're going to look at in our audit for vendors. All right, so here's what happens. You figure out you need to hire somebody and you talk to them, you get them to the point where you're like, okay, I want to hire you. And then the vendor sends you or gives you a contract to sign. Maybe it's an electronic thing. You get it in the email and you read it and you're supposed to sign it electronically, or maybe they hand it to you on paper. Either way, you glance at it. You're like, oh boy, thinking to yourself, here I go. I got to sit down and read this boring legal contract. I don't really want to read it. Maybe you read it. Maybe you don't. You realize that there's things missing in the contract. You're like, you know what? This doesn't sound too right. Or I don't understand this. I thought you said I could make payments on this. I thought you said I didn't have to pay you all at one time. Or I thought you said my payments were $200 a month. This says they're $500 a month. Or I thought you said you were going to give it to me by November 1st. This says December 1st. All these things, maybe there's things missing. And you realize there's provisions you have no idea what they mean. Maybe it's a thing where it's a non-solicitation. You can't come after their employees. Well, I don't understand. Why would I come after their employees? Or maybe there's other things in there that you just don't even have any idea what they are. But you don't ask questions. You don't negotiate. And you sign the contract because you're short on time. You don't want to deal with it. You don't want to look stupid by asking questions. That's a big one, especially for us service professionals. We're used to knowing everything and we don't like to ask questions because we feel like people are going to think we're stupid if we ask questions. And so a lot of times service professionals are the worst. We don't ask questions. Or you don't go back to them and say, no, I said, we said $200. This says $500, or something like that. So you feel like you're being a pest. You feel like you're being that like squeaky wheel. Or sometimes even as women, we feel like that, we don't want to rock the boat too much. We don't want to stay like that person. Oh, that she's just being that person. Let me just tell you that, this is not a good situation, because you sign it, you hope for the best, and a little while later, the vendor makes you mad. And then there's not much you can do about it. You try to fire the vendor, but now you signed a contract that says you got to give them 60 days notice. So now you got to pay them for another 2 months. You can't fire them, and now you're stuck with them. Or you can fire them, but you got to pay them $3,000 as a termination fee because that's what the contract said. And then you just like, okay, forget it. I don't want to have to pay all that. I'm just going to leave things as they are. This happened to me. This has happened to me several times, that I wanted to fire a vendor, and you know what? I pulled up my contract again, and I'm like, it says I have to do that. Is it really worth it to me? No, I'm just going to let the contract ride out. And that's a business decision we all make, right? I mean, how bad is it? How mad, how bad, is it worth breaking the contract and having to deal with all of that, headache of termination and all that kind of stuff? So sometimes I've just said, you know what, I've got 6 months left. I can deal with it. Or it's been so bad that I'm like, you know what, I can't go another day. This is creating too many problems for me. I've got to terminate this contract. So on the front end, when you start looking at the contract, that's really when this comes into play. It's not in your mind when you're hiring them. You're not automatically thinking, I'm going to get mad at them and I'm going to fire them one day. You don't think that, because if you think that, you wouldn't hire them to begin with, right? It's like you're hiring them because you think that that's the best choice and you think that this is going to work out. But it's at that moment that you have to turn around and look at these provisions and protect yourself later. So here's a system for dealing with vendor contracts. Number one, you read the contract carefully because it matters, right? We just said it matters what these terms are. You don't think, oh, it's never going to happen. Like, you actually have to read it and think it. Ask questions. Don't be afraid of being that person. Every good business owner asks questions. Male, female, doesn't matter. Every good business owner asks questions. If you don't ask questions, you're not making good decisions because you don't have the answers. If you don't like the terms of the contract, negotiate them. Every time. Contracts are negotiated. They're meant to be negotiated. They're meant to be coming back and be like, wait a minute, I don't like this term. Would you accept this? And see what happens. Most of the time, they want your business and they'll negotiate it with you. And then you get the better term. If you don't understand the contract, talk to an attorney. I should have said, talk to them first. Ask them what it means. And then if you still don't understand or you don't feel like you trust them, then talk to an attorney and say, hey, what does this mean? I don't understand what this term means. What does this mean for me? What is indemnification? I don't understand what indemnification means. Indemnification can open you up to a whole lot of money you didn't see that was sitting there. So make sure that you understand what the contracts are. And then if you're worried about the contract, talk to the attorney. If you have a mentor, talk it over with a mentor. Then talk to an attorney. Do not sign the contract until you are completely comfortable signing the contract. The higher the money, the higher the risk, obviously. But sometimes even with low dollar amounts, people are like, you know what, it's okay. It's $50 a month, whatever. But you don't see the backside. You don't see the risk that's taking, that if it turns out bad, you could have to pay more money than you realize. So it's not always what you pay is the amount of risk. There could be other big, huge risks sitting behind you that you just don't see. So sometimes those big risks aren't worth the little money. And then you just pass on that deal altogether. No crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. That is not good business practice. That is not the way businesses succeed. You make an informed business decision, and then you take the risk if it's worth it. Okay, so a word here on handling negotiations, because this is not always easy for people. I'll admit it's not always easy for attorneys. I happen to have the type of personality that I love negotiations. I love going toe to toe with people. I love negotiating in a friendly way that everybody walks away thinking that they've won. And that's the point, is everybody walks away getting something that they've wanted. So things to remember: it's always okay to negotiate. You always, always, always have a choice. You are never backed into a corner. You are never held to a place where you don't have a choice. You always have a choice. And so even if you negotiate and you don't get what you want, you can walk away and find someone else. It's not the end of the world. If it takes you another week or two to find another vendor, so be it. Sometimes that extra week or two is the best thing to do than to get into a situation that's not the best situation for you. And the most successful businesses negotiate. I've said this again. The most successful businesses negotiate. And that's part of how you are as a business owner. There is a book recommendation I have for you. I love this book. If you're a reader, I actually listened to it on audio while I was driving in my car. It's called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So Chris Voss was an FBI negotiator, like a hostage negotiator. And he has this whole system of, how to look at things and how to negotiate with things, even just, very simple things, negotiating with your child to do their chores. It goes into very simple things like that. I really enjoyed it. I liked his writing style, and I liked to hear how he explained situations, and thought it was really interesting. And I think every woman, especially, needs to improve negotiation skills, because it can only help us the better we get in business. Okay, so here's what your audit sheet is going to look like. Your audit sheet is going to have some things about vendors. And it says, have you ever had to fire a vendor? Have you ever had a dispute with a vendor? Have you ever been unsatisfied with a vendor's services? Have you ever had a relationship with a vendor you did not trust? And have you ever been uncertain as to what the vendor will provide? These are flags for you looking at your past relationships to say, has this happened to me before? And if so, I need to remember those situations so that I don't do it again. So these are flags to say something I did in the past I can learn from. And if there's other situations here, I left a couple of blanks because sometimes maybe something came to mind as you're thinking about past vendors. Think about who you've hired. You can even think about on the personal side, if you had a roofer situation or somebody come in on the personal side, what was your experience there? And really ask yourself what happened with that situation and what went wrong so that you can avoid that in the future. Then we have this section here, and this is a section that you're going to have to take some time with. This is a section that says, here's your instructions. You list all of your current vendors in this section here, and then you indicate whether you have a written contract with them. Now, when you indicate if you have a written contract, I actually want you to get the written contract and put it in your files. Don't let it sit in your email inbox. Don't let it sit somewhere on your desk, throw it into a bin. Gather your contracts up and put them in a file. You can make them all in one file if you want. Vendor contracts, stick them all in there. Electronic file, fine. Physical file, fine. Just gather them together so that you have them if you need them moving forward. So if for example, you want to end a relationship and you're like, oh, how many days notice do I have to give? Is it 5? Is it 10? How do I have to notice them? Do I have to pay extra? What do I need to do? You've got your contract right there and it'll show you. It's a little embarrassing to say, hey, I want to fire you, but I don't know how to do it. Can you send me my contract? I mean, that's a little embarrassing on both ends. So have the contract in your files already, know what your situation is. And then rate your satisfaction with each vendor on a scale 1 to 5. And this makes this process makes you think about that specific vendor and whether you want to continue with their services. Do I get benefit from it? Is this worth the value? Am I getting what I want to get? Is this helping my business? And this allows you to make those decisions by looking at each individual vendor on a one-on-one basis. One thing I do want to pull up here that I take a moment with is your landlord. So if you have physical space and you've entered into a lease with your landlord, whether it's office space, retail space, manufacturing, whatever it is, that your landlord is your vendor. So that landlord provides something to you, space. So they are a vendor. Leases are a lot different than most other contracts. They have their own separate set of rules. So one of the things about leases that I want to mention here is your ability to renew the lease. And sometimes I have clients that don't pay attention to dates. And so maybe they have a 3-year lease and they have an option to renew for another 3 years, but they have to notify the landlord by a certain time. Maybe it's 6 months before the end of their lease term. They have to let the landlord know that they're going to renew, or if they're not going to renew, and they just blow through that deadline. And so the landlord says, okay, they didn't tell me they're renewing, so now I'm going to go open it back up and I'm going to lease it out to somebody else. And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute, I want to renew my lease. And the landlord says, I'm sorry, too late. I've already got another tenant coming in. Or it's too late. I've already hired a broker and I've already paid somebody to advertise this and do all this stuff. You're not in a good position then, to renegotiate. They might, increase your rent. They may, any number of things. So pay attention to those dates when your lease expires, and then if you want to renew it. So I would say, as part of this exercise, if you have any of those types of contracts that kind of automatically renew, why don't you get out your calendar and write in there when they expire? So if your only chance to terminate the contract is when right before renewal, make sure you know when that renewal is, so you can send the notice and say, hey, I'm not renewing. Don't sign me up for another year. I'm good. Otherwise, sometimes they just auto renew. They don't have to give you notices in Florida for businesses to auto renew. They have to give consumers notice for auto renew. So your Amazon Prime, your Netflix, all of your consumer services, they send an email saying, hey, we're renewing you. Hey, we're renewing you. Businesses, that we don't get that. The law doesn't require notice to businesses for auto renewals. So keep that in mind and watch for that. Look in your contracts as you go through this exercise here of pulling out all of your contracts. Do I have a written contract? Yes. What's my scale? 1 to 5. And you're putting those into your file in your folder. Make a note whether those need to be noticed on your calendar so that you know whether to cancel them on time or renew on time. Okay, so then moving forward for new clients or new vendors. So keep in mind, we've looked at past vendors. We've said whatever our past issues we've had, we want to make sure we avoid those. We look at current vendors. What's the status of our current vendors? Now we're going to look forward and we're going to say, when we hire somebody new, what do I need to do? And here's your checklist. Do you receive a contract from each vendor you hire or consider hiring? You should, because the contract protects you. Do you personally read each contract to make sure you understand it? You should. If you don't understand the contract, do you ask the vendor questions? Do you hire an attorney to help you understand it or negotiate it? This could be yes or no, depending on the situation. There's no right answer on this one. If it's a lease, I would say yes, you need to hire an attorney, because a lease is a really huge expense and there's a huge liability and lots of hidden costs. But if it's like bookkeeping services, maybe not. You probably don't have your attorney review your bookkeeping services, because that's a lower dollar value. There's not as much moving parts to that. If you're hiring independent contractors and things like that, all these different pieces, you have to understand what the liability is, what the weight of it is, the expense to you, what the risk is, so that you understand whether I need to have an attorney review it. So this answer could be yes or no, and either answer is right or wrong given the circumstances. Do you negotiate any of the contract terms? I would say that you should try to negotiate every single contract that you go to sign. Negotiate something. Just practice. Whether it's, hey, I'd like to pay this on the 15th rather than the 1st. Are you okay with that? I'm balancing my bills throughout the month. It could be something super simple, but I'd like to see you all start to negotiate something. Okay. The more practice you get at negotiating, the easier it gets for you, the more comfort you have. And so then when the bigger ticket comes, you have the ability to and the strength and confidence to negotiate the bigger items. Do you calendar the service period so that you can track any renewals? At the time that you enter the contract, it's good because it's on your mind, you see what it is. Go ahead and put it in your calendar so that when you see it come up on your calendar next year, you don't have to go back digging through your contracts. Okay, so that's the audit sheet you're going to get for this time. Now, these two are a little bit bigger than the two I gave you last time, right? There's a little bit more involved. So you're going to go through these two audit checklists, set some time aside to go through them. Again, we're not fixing the problems right now. We're just flagging them. So we're, putting our systems in place, calendaring what we need to do. So the audit sheet you'll get, have your concerns, your questionnaire, your calendar, when are you going to address these concerns? So go ahead and calendar some time for yourself to look through this. Again, we're building the stronger plane. If you want to grow, gain your altitude, more people on the plane, more customers, and more employees, the business grows higher and higher, you're going to need to have this strength in your business. And so this is what you're going to do for these two topics. All right, so now this is the time where you assess and prioritize whether it's, you start with your contracts with your clients or your contracts with your vendors, assess where your needs are and kind of allocate your time for there. And now it's time for Q&A. I'm a little bit early because I saw some questions poking up, so I went ahead and got us here earlier. So let's go ahead and start with some questions. It says, I have some questions after completing the audit sheet homework from last session. Okay, Angela, go ahead. And if there are questions you can put and type in, go ahead and put them in. All right, one question, it says, my Sunbiz LLC registration title is manager. I'm a single owner LLC, and that is the same as single member LLC, correct? That is correct. An owner of an LLC is called a member. So a single owner LLC is the same thing as a single member LLC. Should I add a president title when I file my next annual report, or is manager enough? A manager is higher than a president. So it goes manager. If you're a manager, you're over everybody. The officers are underneath you. So the president is underneath the manager, the vice president, all the officers are under the manager. The manager is the highest title you can have for an LLC if you are manager managed. Remember, we talked last time about two different types of LLCs, member managed, manager managed. Member managed, all the members have equal rights of management. Manager managed, only the managers manage the company. The owners are kind of silent. They don't have day-to-day. They don't do anything. So only the manager runs the show. So if you're the manager, that's the highest title you can have. I hope that answers that question. Should you add a president? Again, that's up to you, but the manager is the highest. Is the title only a personal choice, or does it have legal consequences? It has legal consequences. Every title has legal consequences. Yes. So if you have people that work for you, or maybe you're the only person and you've got some family members that are helping you with a business and you want to give them a title to kind of show your appreciation or kind of, acknowledge their involvement. When you give them a title, you're giving them legal authority. So if that's what you want to do, just be aware that's what you're doing. If you don't want to give them legal authority to act on behalf of the business, then don't give them a title. Okay, so then that was that question. I want to do business using my exact LLC name as it is. So I still need to register a fictitious name? Only if you want to drop the LLC. So if you always use the LLC, those three letters LLC at the end of your name, if you always use them, you don't need to file a fictitious name registration. But the state of Florida takes the position that if you want to drop LLC from your business name, then you must file a fictitious name registration. Okay. Let's see, articles of an organization. They are auto-generated by Sunbiz at LLC creation. I have changed my business name and address on Sunbiz since then. How do I update articles of organization? I could not locate instructions on Sunbiz website. Okay, so the articles of organization for an LLC, for a corporation, they're called articles of incorporation. So for an LLC, it's called articles of organization. That's like a birth certificate. It doesn't get changed. So it is what it is. The moment you file it, that's what it is. So it's the birth certificate of your company. You have changed your name and address. So to change your address, all you need to do is on your annual report, you just change your address. That's it. To change your name, you had to file articles of amendment. Articles of amendment change your name. So now you have two articles: articles of organization, the original, articles of amendment. Together, they show the change. So you will never be able to go back and change your articles of organization, but you change the content by filing articles of amendment. So some things you can change on your annual report, like your officers, your addresses, but there's some things you can't change on your annual report without filing a articles of amendment, and your name change is one of those. Okay. All right, so let's see here. Oh, you're welcome. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody else have questions on today or last week? I know there was a lot of information here. Anything on vendors, clients? All right, Anna Maria, I think it looks like we're pretty well finished and wrapped up with our Q&A a little bit early. I was expecting a whole lot more questions. Maybe I'm just being super clear and people are getting it right off the bat, or they are still processing, which that's the more likely scenario, is that they're still processing all this information and they want to have a chance to think about it and bring me their questions next week, which you are welcome to do. Any topics we're covering, you can bring them any week to our conversation, and I'm happy to answer them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura Lee.
You're welcome.
You can go ahead and talk a bit about the homework.
Okay, so I do have homework for you all. This is in preparation for next week's topics. So I want you to do some advanced work so that you come in with a little bit more content in front of you. And this is what you're going to get. And this is in your virtual classroom. So this is a sheet that is for next class, and it says employee versus 1099 contractor. I want you to list the employees and then the contractors. You can list them by name. You're not going to give them to me. You're not going to turn them in. It's confidential to you, but I want you to have this information for our next week's topic, which is all about internal relationships. All right. All right. That's all I had. It's back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everything. That was super, super insightful. There you go. And I see Danica asked if I can send the worksheets. So through the online classroom, as I said earlier, you will be able to access your homework assignment for next class, as well as those audit sheets for this week. We also have some work from last week that's available there. So I highly encourage you to go into that online classroom, and you will find all of that information there. I think that was super, super insightful and really, really helpful. I was looking over at the audit sheets as well, and that's a lot of information that's so very, very useful that I think we can all very much appreciate. So I think I really don't see any other questions. I see Damika writing great workshop. I completely agree with her. And so we will be meeting here again next Tuesday at 10:30 for our session 3. Make sure you have completed your homework assignment. All of our worksheets are up on the online classroom. I will be uploading the recording in a bit. So just be a little patient with me. I will have it before 1. But that's all I got. So Laura Lee, thank you for all of your information. And everybody have a wonderful, wonderful week.
My
Bye.
pleasure. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.